Hello everyone and welcome back to the Humanoid Encounters Iceberg. Now, if you're clicking on this video for the first time, this is actually part 2, and I'm actually going to link part 1 in the description below. And since this is part 2, it's now time to get into the more obscure and scary stuff. Even on the 4th tier, it was kind of hard to look up stuff and find some information, but these next few tiers, it's going to be a lot worse. And they're probably going to be a lot shorter too because, can't really find that many info on it. And without further ado, let's jump right in to the bottom of the iceberg. The term flannel shirt Sasquatch denotes a rare subcategory of North American hominid sightings in which the mysterious creature appeared to be wearing human clothes, most consistently a ragged flannel shirt or otherwise animal skins. In the 1960s and 1970s, reports from the American West would occasionally surface of hairy bipedal Bigfoot being seen with tattered plaid shirts and ragged shorts on their bodies. In some research, there were intriguing attempts to relate these files of paranormal encounters with sightings of upright entities said to be wearing checkered shirts. The Reno Evening Gazette of March 27th of 1907 ran a story about a frightening ape-man seen in Lexington, Kentucky by a farmhand. The wild man was said to be wearing a raccoon skin across its loins. A man named John Baptist saw a man-like creature with a long, dark beard near Fort Leard, Northwest Territories in April 1964. It uttered a wild growl and fled, leaving tracks. The following month, an Indian woman saw the same wild man, and in June outside of Fort Simpson, a 14-year-old boy and his father saw a small, dark creature with a long beard who carried a stone club and wore a piece of moose skin around his waist. The only explanation that could be is that it's an undiscovered species of a cryptid, or it could just be a really hairy man that was mistaken for a cryptid. So, yeah. The Silverman sighting was an extraterrestrial sighting that took place at approximately 11:30 p.m. on the evening of March 17, 1978. A 39-year-old service engineer by the name of Ken Edwards was making the 15-mile journey home to Warrington Newtown development following a union meeting in Greater Manchester. Edwards claimed that he first spied what he thought was a man climbing, but he quickly realized that he was looking at a gargantuan, humanoid figure lumbering down the steep embankment adjacent to the nuclear facility. The startled engineer immediately hit the brakes, and his van slowed to a halt near the curb off the road, some 50 feet away from the hulking humanoid, which was now illuminated by his headlights. The anxious engineer estimated that the figure was at least 7 feet in height and was either clad in some sort of reflective silver fabric akin to a radiation suit or had been a dull metallic epidermis. He also claimed that the figure's roundish face was black, or that it was covered with some sort of mask, with no discernible features except for a pair of glowing eyes. Furthermore, it had 2 thin arms that were not attached at its shoulders, but stuck straight out of its chest like a Tyrannosaurus Rex. Edwards also noticed that this creature assumed an odd, stooped posture as it scrambled down the hill, which seemed impossible for a human to emulate without toppling over. And apparently, without warning, 2 pencil-thin energy beams of white light shot from the humanoid's eyes directly into the man's van. The man claimed that as soon as he was struck by these intense ocular beams, he was overcome by a dizzy sensation and lost all sense of time. Edwards also claimed that there was some kind of invisible force that had apparently paralyzed him. This guy kind of reminds me of the aliens from Majora's Mask. Perfect description. 2 beams, come on. It's the same thing. You know what? It's just the Silver Surfer himself. That's probably the best explanation that I got. Or this guy just needed some sleep really bad, so he was just hallucinating the entire thing. In Falkville, Alabama, on October 17, 1973, a spaceship was spotted out on a field. When the authorities got involved, the chief Jeff Greenhall didn't see a spaceship, but instead something he would later regret seeing as an alien. Not sure why the Iceberg said this is a cryptid and not an alien. The tinfoil alien was clad in a suit fabricated from or similar to thick aluminum foil, intensely bright and as smooth as glass. Its movements were childlike or even monkey-like, but at the same time very robotic and mechanical. There appeared to be no separation between the neck and head, which bore an antenna. It ran at speeds that, according to Greenshaw, far exceeded that of any human he'd ever seen. It seemed to have a literal spring in its step, covering 3 meters every way. The man was trying to get a better picture of this entity, so he started his engine and put on his headlights. But the creature bolted, and it was faster than any human or anything he saw before. He tried to follow it in his truck, but even at 35 miles an hour, he was no match for the incredibly fast entity. Shortly after, he hit a bump and went into a ditch. After that, he never saw it again. But the weird thing is, after this encounter with this entity, Greenhall, apparently his marriage fell apart, he was terminated by the town council, and even his house was burned to the ground. Very, very, very weird stuff. It's actually very hard to say if this is even a hoax or not, but some people think this is pretty similar to the Pascagoula elephant people, which I already covered that in part 1. On the night of March 14th, 1971, 2 young men, Brian Scott and Nick Corbin, were in the Superstition Mountains near Apache Junction to gather snakes. During the night, a light was seen coming over the mountains. It approached, and the next thing they knew, they were hastily leaving the campsite, following an unexplainable lapse of time. 5 years later, under hypnosis, Scott described how the object emitting a purplish light from underneath approached and hovered over them. He felt a pulsating, pulling feeling, and the 2 young men were lifted up into the craft. Inside, they were separated, and Scott was led by a 7 feet tall entity down a corridor to a door which, upon approaching, shattered inside. In a small room filled with mist, he encountered 4 or 5 similar creatures, 7 foot tall and one with grayish skin similar to that of a crocodile, and with 3 fingered hands. Scott was stripped and placed against a wall panel very brilliantly lighted. The room was cold and the mist emerged from vents in the floor. A machine directly in front of him appeared to do a scanning move around him, and a new entity, this one is 9 foot tall, communicated telepathically with him and asked him why he was afraid. His mind was briefly transported to, presumably, the being's home planet. The beings that examined him had huge ears, no hair, and slit-like mouths. Their feet were elephant-like with 3 broad toes. When the examination was completed, Scott was reunited with his friend and returned to the ground, with no conscious memory of what had taken place. However, both felt an unspecified terror of such degree that they immediately packed their gear and returned to town. Brian Scott also learned that these beings had a method of displacing their ships through space by using a series of hops. These spacecrafts were guided in their trajectories by a number of space navigational beacons that are placed strategically throughout the galaxy. So this guy was clearly, I guess he was hallucinating, but he saw this weird Clayface looking guy. And that is pretty much all the info that I can find. Still no explanation, but whether it's a hoax or not, this guy was most likely on something, or maybe he did get abducted. So the Ariel School alien sighting was an extraterrestrial sighting that took place on September 16, 1994 at the Republic of Zimbabwe's Ariel School, a private elementary school about 20 miles outside the capital of Harare. The event began at approximately 10:15 a.m. while the children were playing in a field adjacent to the school during their mid-morning break. The children claimed that while they were playing, they noticed 3 silver balls soaring in the sky above the school. These orbs, which quickly caught the attention of the whole group, intermittently flashed red and would disappear in a burst of light and then reappeared in another section of the sky. According to the eyewitnesses, these mysterious metallic objects vanished and rematerialized 3 more times before slowly descending toward the school, following a line of transmission towers. The anxious kids then claimed that one of the silver UFOs dropped lower than the others and landed in a cluster of gum trees about 300 feet from where they were playing. It was at that moment that this already strange scene took a turn of a bizarre, when a small, black-clad humanoid figure approximately 3 feet in height emerged from the top of the object. The witnesses claimed that the being's suit was shiny and tight-fitting. They also stated that it had a scrawny neck, a narrow face, thin arms and legs, long black hair, and huge eyes like rugby balls. The entity, apparently unaware of the growing crowd of spectators, scrambled down to the rough patch of the earth, presumably to explore the terrain. The creature apparently moved back and forth in the scrub bush like it was bouncing as if it were on the moon, but not quite so much. Then after he ran away, nobody ever saw the same creatures again. Apparently some of the older students claimed that the aliens communicated telepathically to them that humanity was killing the planet Earth, and this is actually a common occurrence in these kind of cases. So yeah, that's not a bit scary at all. The Peje Garafa, I hope I said that right, or also known as Bottlefoot, is an unknown ghost or primate of South America. It is said to be human-looking, has a height of 5 feet, has black skin, long head hair, horn in the forehead, white navel, large hands, and no feet. It stares intently as if to hypnotize and roars very loudly. The tracks resembles the print made by sticking the bottom of a bottle in the ground. The trails they leave are regularly spaced and are exactly aligned. The footprints also avoid obstacles. It is commonly believed that these bottle-like tracks are actually left by giant sloths from their powerful tail. So there we go, problem solved. It's just one giant sloth. Really cannot find any info on this either. A lot of obscure stuff in these next few entries. The Jacobs photographs were a series of photos taken by R. Jacobs in 2007 that shows a furry, primate-like creature appearing after 2 bear cubs were filmed at an earlier time. Many have speculated, though, that it could be a juvenile Sasquatch or another mystery primate. Others have simply deemed it as a mangy black bear, who, under poor light conditions, took the appearance of a primate. And actually, this got attention to the Pennsylvania game wardens, and they actually said this is probably a bear. I mean, just look at this photo. I mean, it looks pretty obvious it's probably a bear. Or it could just be that a chimpanzee got loose somehow and is just in the middle of the woods terrorizing animals. Either this is like an alien of some sort, or my probable guess is that somehow a chimpanzee got loose from somewhere, maybe a nearby zoo, and this trail cam just caught it on film, I'm guessing. The Zanfretta UFO incident was an alleged alien encounter of Italian night watchman Pier Zanfretta. He later claimed to have been abducted by the beings 11 times between 1978 and 1981. According to Zanfretta, on December 6, 1978, at approximately 11:30 at night, he was examining the villa Casa Nostra, and upon entering the backyard he saw a red, oval object with a diameter of over 10 meters, and at this point he called his supervisor, who recalled him screaming on turning around. Zanfretta reported running into beings who were 3 meters tall with molted skin as though they were fat, wearing a rumpled suit. The creatures had yellow triangular eyes and clawed feet. When the supervisor asked if he was being attacked by men, Zanfretta was said to have responded, "No, they are not men," at which this point communication was lost. Zanfretta was then later found unconscious and in a state of shock by his colleagues. Later, when under hypnosis, Zanfretta would claim that the beings had abducted him and taken him into a bright room in their craft. He also added to the description of the aliens being saying, "They are green with triangular yellow eyes with big thorns, and they have green flesh, and their skin is full of wrinkles as if they were old." After this incident happened, a full-on investigation was launched, and they were able to find 52 witnesses who also claimed to have seen the same UFO. And actually, where Zenfreta claims the craft had touched down, investigators noted that there was a horseshoe-shaped impression approximately 2 meters in diameter. Again, there's not really an explanation for this entire case, but it also is kind of weird that 52 other witnesses claim to see like the same UFO, or it could just be that they also wanted attention, or like, like their 5 seconds of fame. So maybe they just wanted money or something, but a lot of people saw the same thing, so I don't know. The highway humanoid was a strange humanoid cryptid that was caught on film on a highway in England. The video was filmed sometime in 2007. Here's actually some still frame photos and what shows appeared to be a human head, body, and legs on a bizarre humanoid running on all fours. Now this creature is probably like a deranged dog, or probably some man on crack, to be honest, but my explanation is that what if it's actually Highway Star from JoJo's Bizarre Adventure? Nah, I'm joking. You can't actually see stands anyway. Fear Liath Moore, otherwise known as the Big Grey Man, is known to stalk the people who climb the mountain of Ben Macdui? I don't know. The second highest peak in Scotland. Because of the high levels of fog there, not many people have seen it. The Grey Man appears to be a very tall humanoid, at least 8 feet high, although some people have seen him as 30 feet tall. It is covered in short gray hair, hence the name. Many times the witnesses didn't even see it, but still could hear it due to the loud footsteps. Many believe the Grey Man is a relative to Sasquatch or Bigfoot. It normally stalks its victims until they realize that it is following them, and then it chases them. This is a common pattern. It walks on 2 legs and walks like a normal person. When he is nearby, people feel a cold sensation run all over their body, and they can hear a high-pitched humming sound, or the singing as it's sometimes called, which is associated with the Grey Man. Some people have actually claimed that they feel a lot of negative energy when he's around, and actually leads to suicidal thoughts or physical flight from the area itself. Sightings of this Grey Man actually revert all the way back to the 13th century. During one sighting, the Grey Man actually chased a car, and apparently he ran up to 45 miles per hour. This guy just seems like something straight out of Skyrim, or like the big Goron guy from Zelda. Probably that's who that is, but this guy just straight up reminds me of that frost troll that was really hard to beat the first time at Skyrim. So definitely a no from me. According to a South American journal, first published in 1976, a couple of unfortunate souls had a terrifying run-in with 2 bizarre winged creatures while strolling along a moonlit forest trail in southern Brazil, somewhere close to the coastal city of Pelotas. This apparently actually took place sometime in the 1950s when a couple were the reluctant witnesses in question. The strange silhouettes were swooping around over the forest trail just ahead of them, and as they looked up into the beautiful nighttime sky, they could have sworn that the shapes represented 2 large birds gracefully soaring through the clouds above the forest canopy. But suddenly, the 2 creatures landed in front of the couple, and they were actually much taller than any bird, and that their bodies looked uncannily humanoid. While the bewildered witnesses stood there, presumably utterly dumbstruck at the scene unfolding before their eyes, the creatures seemed to crouch down as if they were trying to avoid being seen. The couple then felt this unexpected dread all over them, and so their instinct was to run. So, I mean, I would too. But the man would later confess to regretting the fact that he didn't stay to find out about the true nature of these airborne anomalies. And to this day, nobody knows exactly what these creatures are. Now, it possibly could be some unknown species that, was never identified, or wasn't even discovered yet, or it could just be the Oka from Twilight Princess, because from the pictures that I've researched, they pretty much look the same. The Headless Angel of Portugal was a mysterious humanoid being sighted by 4 young shepherds near Quebeco, Portugal in the summer of 1915. The entity was described as a figure like a statue made of snow, which the rays of the sun had turned somewhat transparent. The entity reportedly had bright white skin and a distinct lack of a head, but somehow managed to hover in the air with no discernible wings. Again, I couldn't really find any good info on this one. It's literally like 2 paragraphs from what I've looked up. But the possible explanation is that it could be like an angel, perhaps, or it could just be one big hoax. The Farmersville Green Man sighting was an extraterrestrial sighting that took place in May of 1913 near Farmersville, Texas. While chopping cotton one May morning, there was 3 brothers that heard their 2 dogs barking as if in distress. They went to see what was bothering them and found the dogs had cornered a small green man which appeared to be made of rubber. In an instant, the dogs were upon the man and shredded him in their teeth, leaving only miniature, human-like remains. The disturbing incident remained a family tradition, whatever that's supposed to mean, until the grandson related the story in a letter to the Center for UFO Research. He was then interviewed, but the transcript mysteriously has since been lost. The creature was described as being no taller than 18 inches, and the dark green creature was devoid of clothing, save for a small hat similar to a sombrero, which was fused to his rubbery skin. This hat was at the back of his head and was described as like a small sombrero and being shaped together with the remainder of the rubber-like skin or tight-fitting suit of the little character. On this point, all witnesses appear to have been undecided as to whether the rubbery texture was skin or an external suit. Now for this entry, actually some of you might actually remember this from happening last year, and this took place around June of 2022 when the unidentified Amarillo object, is what they're calling this so-called entity, appeared at the Amarillo Zoo in Texas. And this picture literally shows this humanoid, like hedgehog looking person on their security cameras from overnight. The Amarillo Zoo actually came out and said, unfortunately, the camera at the Amarillo Zoo was not able to provide a clear image of the UAO. Obviously, we're making it our mission at WISE, I think that's how you pronounce it, to make sure when and if it comes back, we all get the answers we need. That's why we're sending 80 of our cameras. These cameras have night vision, so we get a clear shot of when the UAO and if it comes back. Now, this entry kind of freaks me out because looking at these pictures, you can't even tell what that is. I mean, it looks humanoid, but it looks just very hairy and it has a weird stance on it. All I can think of when I see this is Sonic the Hedgehog in real life or something. But they then said that no animals were harmed and there was no damage, funny enough. So literally what this wasn't even in the zoo. This entry takes place around May 18th, 1749. One day, a man named John Mitchell, as he was traveling on the road, he was met by a man of a gigantic stature. His face shone like the sun, on his head something resembling a crown with stars, with wings on his shoulders. His body seemed of transparent fire, but suddenly it disappeared like several balls of light, attended with an explosion like that of a number of cannons. Most people, when they think of angels, they're just lovely looking, blonde haired dudes dressed in white with fluffy wings and maybe have a harp. But this guy definitely seen a biblically accurate angel. And there's a reason why they have to say, be not afraid when they approach someone. This guy in 1749 came upon a biblically accurate angel. Just to put you in perspective on what they usually look like, here's a great picture of how they are described in the Bible. And yeah, not pleasant to the eyes. All the time you hear about people encountering angels and such, but nah, this dude literally had in this picture seems to have a bow and arrow. I don't think he actually saw that. I would think he would probably see one of these right here, in this picture. Angels are such an amazing topic to me. Like, there's like different classes and such, and it's pretty cool. I would look it up. It's actually just very interesting topic. The Central Kentucky Humanoid entry was a post on Reddit from about 2 years ago on the r/humanoid encounter subreddit. The description of the post says, EMT friend saw this 2 nights ago turning his ambulance around at the end of a rural road. It was swaying and its eyes were glowing without the headlights. Took place in Central Kentucky. This user would even post in the subreddit r/Bigfoot and the other subreddit r/Skinwalkers, but then again, no real answers have been found at this time. On September 4th, 1964, 28-year-old Donald Shrum and his friends were bow hunting at Cisco Grove, Placer County, California. Before very long, the avid hunter would have an encounter with the unknown and the most memorable hunting trip of his life. During the afternoon of hunting, Shrum had become separated from the rest of the group, and with nightfall fast approaching, he decided to sleep the night away in a tree for safety. His attention was soon drawn, however, to the sight of a white light which zigzagged through the trees at a low altitude. Shrum jumped down from the tree because he thought it would be a helicopter of some sort, but he soon discovered that the object was not a helicopter at all, but a strange-looking object, different from anything he had seen before. After a short period of time, he was shocked to see 3 beings approaching the tree. 2 of them seemed to be a humanoid type of being, while the third was more robot-like. Shock became utter panic now, as the 3 began to shake the tree in an attempt to dislodge him. The man vividly recalls a white vapor being shot from the robot's mouth, which rendered him unconscious. When he finally came to, he was still nauseous, but he managed to load and shoot an arrow at the invaders, hitting the robot. The direct hit caused a spark to fly, indicating that the arrow had hit a metallic surface. He managed to shoot 2 more arrows at the beings, each time causing the group to scatter. But soon after all this happened, a second robot joined the group, and again, Shrum was rendered unconscious by the strange white vapor coming from the other entity's mouth. And this scenario continued off and on for most of the entire night. And as dawn approached, more beings arrived, and this time a large volume of smoke caused him to black out completely. When he awoke, he was barely hanging from the tree by his belt. The aliens were finally gone. Shrum was soon rescued and reunited with the other hunters. And one of the other men, who had also become lost, had seen the UFO. What exactly were these humanoid-like creatures that Shrum encountered that fearful night in California? This entry took place sometime during the medieval period in the Black Forest somewhere in Germany. I said somewhere in Germany because I no idea how to pronounce this name. But anyway, a flying, flaming humanoid was said to have flown around the village before finally coming to rest on a church steeple. Presumably in a mad panic at the sight of what they would have taken to be a demonic apparition, the townsfolk amassed around the church and started throwing rocks at the aerial elemental. After what could be taken to be quite a while, judging by indications given in the source, the flying fiend finally departed, never to be seen again. Now, very obviously, this is just the Human Torch from the Fantastic Four series, and I actually really like those early 2000 movies. Well, except for that one that we all know about. But could this actually be a flying, burning man in a somehow fireproof costume? Or maybe like some kind of angel? What do you guys think? People in the small town of Bad Axe, Michigan had become unsettled when rumors went around about strange doings in the area. People were beginning to hear tales of a strange humanoid creature haunting the quiet country backroads. In the space of a few weeks, reports grew in number, and the police became involved, and events were headed for an unlikely crescendo before the month was out. The early reports came from teenagers driving out in the country roads. Looming out of the darkness, a figure would run alongside the car as they gunned the engine and sped away to safety. Later incidents became more detailed as some people described the creature as over 10 feet tall. All these people even agreed that the monster was blue. It didn't take long for the police to become interested, and especially after a bus full of kids were terrorized by the creature. And because since the police got involved, it turns out the guy turned himself in, it was just a dude in a costume this entire time. He made this homemade alien costume and decided it would be funny to scare people, which, I mean, honestly, I would probably do the same thing. And he just spray painted it blue. And funny enough, the police department actually thought this was funny as well, so they just let the guy off with just a warning. A group of friends were camping out on the Montour Trail in western Pennsylvania, and one of the group encounters a 8-9 foot unknown humanoid while gathering wood. It was around 9 to 9:30 p.m. and the fire was getting low, so one of the group members decided to go off and gather some more firewood. At this point, the man was far away enough from camp that his friends couldn't really see him. Then all of a sudden, he started to hear a weird whistling sound. The man described the sound as kind of like someone inhaling through a snorkel. The air was getting quite cold, so the man decided to go back to camp. A few hours go by and it's finally 2 a.m. and the fire has already died down again, so the man has to go back out and get some more firewood. As he is collecting firewood again, the whistling sound comes back, but the scary thing is, he said there was actually no wind, so it couldn't have been the wind this time making this noise. The man hurriedly gathered his firewood, and all of a sudden, the whistling noise got even louder and louder, and so he headed back straight to camp. But then all of a sudden, he could hear the whistling noise in all different types of directions around him. That's not even the scariest part of the story. All of a sudden, this whistling noise literally started talking like his friend back at camp. And so the man thought he was out there with him, so he kept on looking for him with his flashlight. But all he could hear was his friend from once like far away from him and then suddenly right behind him. The scared man decided to hide next to a tree for some god-known reason in the middle of the woods at night, for the whistling noise and the talking to stop. Well, as it finally died down, he decided to make his way back to camp again. But as soon as he started to run back to camp again, the voices and the whistling came back, but this time, it was the man's own voice haunting him. He described it as it being his own voice, but it was more gargled and like gnarly sounding. The man then decided to hide behind a bush once again, but soon after he peeked his head out from the bush and actually looked at the tree that he was hiding from, and lo and behold, this disfigured, tall, skinny, skinwalker-looking creature was sitting there, just waiting for him. The creature then stood up and asked for his name, and suddenly let out a high-pitched scream and just ran off into the forest, never to be seen again. This entire incident happened the entire night, and the sun was finally coming up. And so the guy finally went home, packed his bags, whatever, get back from camping, and decided to look up what he found. And it pretty much correlates with the infamous Wendigoon. Now, these things can take up many forms and are labeled as a skinwalker. The description this guy laid out for what this creature was pretty much looks like the Rake. You guys know that creepypasta? I'm sure you've heard about it before. But yeah, this was very detailed and a very long story. If you want to read it for yourself, it's in the description below. This incident took place in the southeast Welsh region of Torfaen in sometime before 1813. It involves a man named Frank Afeard, and he was walking late at night when all of a sudden he stared through the darkness to catch a glimpse of the figure approaching him. This creature was making an odd noise, and from what Frank described, the sight that greeted him was described as being dismal. It was apparently a very tall entity of some kind. Despite being struck with dread at this point, he was able to squeeze out a threat against the bizarre being before him. In quote, "In the name of God, what is here? Turn out of my way, or I will strike thee." Doing what it was told, the entity vanished immediately. However, after the entity vanished, he was suddenly overcome with a hysterical sense of total panic to such a degree that he could no longer remember where he was. Utterly disoriented, he caught sight of two more anomalous objects, which were apparently dun-colored and shaped like post. The sight of these creatures made the man hide behind a cow in a nearby field until they suddenly vanished away. Soon after, Frank decided to leave the field and was drawn towards the warm light of a house which he recognized as being the dwelling place of a woman he knew. Knocking on the door and calling out for help with a feeble and trembling voice, Frank was recognized as being in great distress by the woman who opened the door. The woman then decided to let the man stay home for the night because he was incredibly scared, and then he went back home the next morning. Corin lived with her parents and two sisters in a small house in California in the early 2000s. She shared a room with her two sisters, and in the room was a closet with folding doors that could be slid out to open them. Usually these doors were closed, but on this fateful night, they were partially open. In quote, this is what she said. "One night, I woke up. I don't know what time it was, but it must have been late because everyone else was asleep in the house, all in bed, all nestled in for the night. My bed was situated to where it was facing the closet doors. As I glanced over at them, an orange glowing man peeked around the door of the closet and looked right at me. He was smiling. His fingers wrapped around the frame of the door first, and then he poked his head out. Now, from what I can remember, he kind of looked like the Joker from the original Batman series and glowed from within. I was so scared, I couldn't make a sound." End quote. Utterly terrified by the bizarre, illuminated apparition before her, she immediately buried her face in the pillow and did not let herself move until the next morning. When she told her parents what had happened, they inevitably concluded that it was a dream and told her such. Now, this case might actually be that this girl was experiencing sleep paralysis. Or, this could be just Caesar Romero from, Batman, decided to haunt this girl in her dreams one night. But the same girl has also said that in the same house, she had witnessed a pair of shoes take a step with no one in them, and she had watched her Barbie doll fall over and sit itself back up. This headless humanoid was seen by 4 men in Spain of 1947. The men described that it sounded like a confusing mixture of many instruments playing at the same time, but with no specific tune or tone, all playing their own nonsensical noise, along with many voices that seemed to be singing, but again, in no particular accord or tone. These 4 men were returning back to their village carrying contraband foodstuff and had stopped for a brief rest on an isolated field. Suddenly, the men began to hear what happened to be sounds of hundreds of hands clapping. The men looked around and spotted a tremendously tall figure approaching their location on a nearby field. The bizarre figure seemed to swing its arms like a soldier. Even stranger, the bizarre figure was wearing a white shirt with a black stripe around the neck area, and it appeared to be headless. Soon after, it disappeared quickly into the distance, taking great strides as it did. And safe to say, the men did not go out on any more night runs after this incident. This is probably one of the strangest entries on this list, in my opinion. So, a man reported seeing a Bigfoot-like creature on 3 glowing metallic red balls hovering over the freeway about 75 yards in the air. This slowed his vehicle to about 10 miles an hour to get a better view when the figure began to fly north across a wheat field. He could only see the back of the creature, and it was solid black with what appeared to be a suit or hairy cloak, sitting on what appeared to be 3 spears connected together. These large round ball-shaped objects had a candy apple metallic glow to them. Shocked, he pulled over. He could see what appeared to be a dead dog, possibly a black and white Sheltie, hanging from the left side of the vehicle on a rope. The figure then flew across the field towards Smith Road. The witness jumped in his car and sped northeast to the road, where he turned and proceeded to speed at around 70 miles an hour towards Smith Road. He got there and turned left, cutting the figure off so he could see it better. At this point, realized the witness was following it and turned and flew more westerly from where it came. He could not get in position to see it again after that. I'm actually not too sure when this incident even happened, but this guy must have been on like a bunch of acid or something to see something like this specific. I mean, come on. A Bigfoot-like person sitting on 3 balls with a dead dog hanging on it. I mean, like, come on. Bro definitely had to be on something. This encounter took place in September of 1968 when a British NCO apparently encountered a orange-skinned humanoid ghost. The British NCO was inside of his army barracks at 3 a.m. one morning. He was alerted to the presence of an intruder when his wolfhound sat up and began growling. Fearing terrorists had infiltrated the base, the soldier crept towards the door of his room. An eerie, high-pitched humming sound started up outside, and the wolfhound promptly hid under the bed. The soldier stepped onto the landing outside his room and was confronted by an unearthly apparition. Floating up the stairs toward him were the dissembled head and shoulders of a humanoid being. The being had a glowing orange face and scarlet hair and was wearing a light blue jumpsuit. It glared at the NCO with unblinking eyes. As it approached the landing, it swiveled its head a full 180 degrees. The witness hastily backed into his room and slammed the door. The humming sound intensified to a deafening pitch. It was accompanied by a sliding noise as though the entity was dragging itself across the landing. The soldier grabbed the only weapon at hand, an underwater spear gun, and fired it straight through the door. The sounds abruptly ceased, but the NCO was too terrified to venture outside again. A patrolling guard discovered him an hour later, still sitting at the edge of his bed, paralyzed by fear. Although the witness soon recovered from his ordeal, his wolfhound was a nervous wreck. For the rest of its life, however, it remained terrified of the slightest sound. This actually isn't really an encounter, but it's actually more of a realization. And it's the fact that the uncanny valley exists, and it's actually really scary to think about. The uncanny valley is where we are scared by things that looks almost human, but aren't. Other animals do not experience the uncanny valley effect and will accept things that look like them with little issue. That means that at some point in our evolution, running away from things that looked almost human was advantageous enough to be imprinted on our genetics. What were we that scared of back then? This whole idea of the uncanny valley has gotten really popular over the last few years. One of the most popular YouTube series is called the Mandela Catalog, and it does a great job of experiencing the uncanny valley. Not gonna lie, the uncanny valley is honestly one of my biggest fears in my lifetime. A lot of people also relate the uncanny valley to the infamous skinwalkers, which I've talked about a lot so far on this channel. A true phantom stranger was seen in the subways of Manhattan, New York on October 1st, 1999. The witness was ascending the escalator at Penn Station and had reached street level when she noticed standing about 20 feet away what seemed to be a male figure about 6 feet 7 inches tall. He stood near the mouth of the entranceway to the station. His face was light gray, almost white, with thick brows and menacing eyes. He stood in a peculiar way, standing with his back arched, shoulders broad, his elbows pointed towards his back, and his head was tilted back as if he was looking at the tops of the passerbys' heads. It was like he was trying to choose one of them. The witness caught a glimpse of his face, but she turned away immediately, and stood away from the sidewalk without turning back, feeling that if she would turn around for another look, something would happen to her. For an unknown reason, she felt tremendous fear. And ever since this incident happened, nobody ever saw the man again. Now, this story actually seems to be a stretch at best, and probably not even paranormal at worst. This person could have easily been like someone with a strange posture, and the source itself is not actually great to go on. So, what do you guys think?